Hello and welcome. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Tonight, President Muhammadu Buhari commends China's investment drive in West Africa as President Xi announces $60 billion in investment on the continent. Tonight, we'll examine the prospects of China's renewed interest in Africa and what the alliance means for the continent. Armed bandits kill at least 11 persons in fresh attacks on Low Pamyat community in Bielsa State. And Brazilian officials blame lack of funding for massive fire at country's 200-year-old National Museum in Rio de Janeiro.
On business news tonight, federal government 2- and 3-year savings bond offerings open for subscription.
And on sports news, FIFA reveals 3-man shortlist for the 2018 Player of the Year award.
President Muhammadu Buhari declines assent to Electoral Act over drafting issues.
We'll begin tonight with President Muhammadu Buhari's reaction to China's increasing investment in West Africa, and he says he is happy with the steps taken by the Asian country in building a prosperous and shared future. The president says China is the largest investor in the sub-region in both private and public sectors, covering areas such as infrastructure, energy, agriculture, mining, and healthcare. According to him, China also provides significant assistance in emergency humanitarian aid and response to climate change. The president says, quote, various construction projects are now ongoing in the sub-region, including the construction of railway projects, power infrastructure, airports, and numerous roads through Chinese financing. While it is pertinent to mention that member states of ECOWAS are at different stages of development, President Xi Jinping's recent visit to our sub-region has highlighted the need for ever closer collaboration, end of quote. The president was speaking at the opening of the high-level dialogue between Chinese and African leaders and business representatives in Beijing. Meanwhile, China has announced a new $60 billion package of investments to Africa and a debt relief for some poorer African countries. China's President Xi Jinping made the announcement today at the opening of the largest forum on the China-Africa cooperation holding in Beijing. Defending his country's investment program in Africa, he says there are no political strings attached to the projects as they are of mutual benefit.
The new pledge by China is sure to boost development in African countries. According to the Chinese president, the $60 billion package will include $20 billion in credit lines, $15 billion as special funds, and $5 billion to finance imports from Africa. President Xi adds that Beijing plans to exempt some African countries from interest-free loans, which are due for repayments by the end of this year. Critics have been warning that African countries have been going into unsustainable levels of debt with China, which has loaned billions of dollars to finance major infrastructure development. 53 African delegations led by presidents and heads of state are attending the two-day meeting, including the chairman of the African Union, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame, and the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and 27 international and African observer missions. Under the theme for this year, China and Africa towards an even stronger community with a shared future through a win-win cooperation, the 2018 summit hopes to build on the outcomes of the last high-level meeting held in Johannesburg in 2015. Industry, infrastructure, and agriculture all rank highly on the agenda, as well as China's Belt and Road Initiative. The summit concludes on Tuesday with the signing of a declaration and an action plan, both expected to guide China-Africa relations for the next 3 years.
And in addition to the debt waiver for some African countries by the Chinese president, the new package for Africa will add to the existing $136 billion of loans and investments that China currently has on the African continent. In this report, Channels Television's business editor Bosun Omofai takes a look at why Africa is the playground of the world's economic superpowers and if the continent can get the best of both the East and Western worlds.
Leaders of leading economies in Europe have been flocking to Africa in recent months, seeking to grease existing diplomatic and bilateral relations while promising bigger trade and investment packages. But over the past few days, two major investment forums focused on Africa have been held in Singapore and in China. From the Horn of Africa of Ethiopia and Djibouti to Kenya and Rwanda in the east, all the way to Nigeria and Ghana in the west, Asian economies are fast expanding their footprints. African leaders meeting for 2 days in Beijing now have promises of additional $60 billion in investments and some credit relief to poorer African states, even as China says its funds will not be used for vanity projects. Africa has been receiving increasing funding support in various areas from China, much to the envy of the United States and Europe, the continent's traditional allies. The newfound economic and investment love between Africa, China, and the Asia-Pacific region comes at a time when growth in the Western markets is sluggish and trade fight between the U.S. and China hits a new level. Africa is rich in mineral resource exports, which both China and the Western economy sorely needs. On the other hand, Africa needs huge funding for its aging infrastructure, which China has in abundance, but now coming in trickles from Africa's traditional friends. But questions are being asked about how mutually beneficial is China-Africa economic relations, and if increased Chinese loans to Africa will tie the continent's future to the apron of Asia on one hand, and to the apron of Western world on the other hand. Boston Namofaye, Channels Television News.
Now we're taking a deeper look at this, and joining us on the news at 10 for the discussion on the Africa-China relationship is the Vice President of the Nigeria Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture, NASIMA, and also the Executive Director of Business Development Africa of Etilsit, Mr. Tony Ejikioye. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, is Africa looking to have the best of both worlds in terms of investments from China as well as the Western world? Is that even possible?
It's a win-win situation, I believe, because all the negative stories, and I know the reason you asked the question is all the negative or the misperceptions about loans from China has always been, is going to be exploitative in nature. But I think that is a win-win situation for China and Africa, especially Nigeria.
Now, are you encouraged by some of the results you've seen so far in the China-Africa? Because this meeting taking place today and tomorrow is not the first. Several meetings have held before this, and several investments have come from China to the African continent. Are you impressed? Are you happy with what you've seen so far about the way that economic managers in Africa are handling these huge investments at this point?
Well, that's a very good question. Because the problem is with Africa, not just Nigeria, but the whole of Africa, is negotiation about identification of the proper projects, especially infrastructures. Just like President Xi Jinping said, that they do not have time for vanity projects anymore. So what that means is that maybe they've had vanity projects in the past, but in the future they are not going to have it. The problem Nigeria has and other African countries have is the fact that usually negotiation for these loans or aid are usually done by the government. What people like us believe is that consultants or professionals should be brought in to negotiate on behalf of government when these loans are going to be granted. Because in the international scene, you get what you negotiate, not what you deserve. Nobody is going to give you a free lunch. It is what your officials negotiate. So my take from time has always been that government should not rely on the civil servants or politicians to negotiate on behalf of government, but consultants, experts and professionals should be the people that will do the negotiation on behalf of government.
Now, let me then ask you, let me ask you now, that because it seems as if Africa, like taking Nigeria as an example, is in the middle. We are being as it were, wooed by both China on one hand and then the Western world. If you take Nigeria in the last couple of months, the German Chancellor has been here, the British Prime Minister has been here, and then, of course, the Chinese President has also been here. Now, I'm just wondering, do you think we're biting off more than we can chew in terms of how much it is we can absorb of all this funding and where we can put them?
Africa and Nigeria is the beautiful bride every country wants to woo as at the moment because of our abundant natural resources. We have to first and foremost identify why are these countries coming to Nigeria, why are these countries coming to Africa. So when we actually find out the underlying reasons why they are coming, so we'll now know whether it's something we can handle. But for the moment, I believe that Nigeria and the rest of Africa can handle the situation. To me, we still don't have enough infrastructure. A lot of people are talking about how much influence China has in Africa and in Nigeria as at the moment, but I don't still think that it is enough because for a country like Nigeria now, the foreign direct investment, the total foreign direct investment that comes from China is still less than 5% of the total Nigeria gets. And the total loan package from China to Nigeria, when you compare it with the total loan package from the rest of the world, is still less than 13%. So we still have more to engage with China and the rest of the world. So the cake is still big enough for everybody.
Now, but there are those who worry that we seem to be piling on debt because a large portion of this money coming in, particularly into Nigeria, is not free money. It's debt, which is repayable. And in addition to all existing debt,
can I come in and
Please.
tell you that as at 2016, from the figures I have up to 2016, I cannot confirm the other figures from 2016. The total loan compared to GDP Nigeria has is about 48%, which is very, very acceptable internationally. Some countries have as much as, some African countries have as much as 80 to 90%. So as at 2016, Nigerian loan ratio to GDP is just 48%. So we can still go higher than that. There's nothing wrong with taking a loan, but the most important thing is making sure it does not go into consumption, but on infrastructure and investments that are going to yield economic opportunities for Nigeria.
At that point, I want to say thank you very much for joining us on the news at 10, Mr. Tony Ejikeoye, the Vice President of the Nigerian Chamber of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture. In part two, after the break, gunmen kidnap Catholic priest in Delta State. That's in a moment. Just stay on with us.